Okay, so welcome to the Western Canada HubSpot user group. Today we're talking about forms. So I'm Lisa, and Cody will be our primary presenter today, and we are Hubcap Solutions, a HubSpot provider. So we like our user groups to be a little bit more pointed, practical, and actionable rather than overarching and strategic. So today we're going to talk specifically about forms. And we're trying a new format for this user group. Instead of me presenting a very structured PowerPoint and asking you to hold your questions to the end, we're going to do a less structured presentation today. So basically, we're here to answer any questions you have about forms. I have a few questions set up and pre-prepared in case you guys don't have any at the moment to get us rolling. And also, Cody wants to start by showing you the form builder because there have been some fun new changes to that. So if you have any questions about forms at all, at any time, make sure you put them in the chat and I will bring those up with Cody so we can address them. And the questions can be related to what Cody's talking about, additional clarification, or it can be completely different topics, kind of whatever's troubling you about forms or whatever you want to learn more about. So please don't hesitate to put any questions in the chat. So I'm going to hand that off to Cody to start presenting.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Lisa. And yeah, I'll just dive right on in. And like I said, it's because we've got a relatively small group here. It's just Lisa and I, and then 6 of you fine folks. When we get down to questions, feel free if something's if it's easier to just say, hey, can I, just unmute me so I can ask my question. Just go for it, and we can have a little bit more of an open discussion as well. All right, so jumping over to the right PowerPoint slide. So like I said, Lisa ran down the agenda kind of high level. We are going to start with the new demo of the new form builder. And then here's some of the other like pre-prepared topics that we got, from creating forms, form strategy. You can see the list in front of you. So this is the stuff that I'm going to talk about. So if that, tickles your fancy in any way, feel free to just wait until I get that and then fire your question off then. But if there's something that you have to ask that's not on that list, we will feel free to drop it in and we'll jump on it. So the new form builder. Let me just switch back over, get my screen share going on actual HubSpot. So this is a beta feature. So you can see right here, I'm just in my Hubcap Solutions account. You're in the beta for the new forms editor. So naturally, the first question is, if you've never looked at the HubSpot product updates section, how does one get into a beta? So if we go under your account name over here, right here under this kind of personal options, there is product updates. And then this is going to show you all the new HubSpot product updates. So it's basically going to show if anything's getting deprecated, when stuff is getting released, and then if it's a public beta, you can just join it. If it's a private beta, you can request access to the private beta. If it's being sunset, et cetera, et cetera. So just pop in here in beta. Where is that one? What the heck do they actually call it? Lisa, do you remember off the top of your head?
No, it should be new form editor. I think the problem was you were in new to you when you were searching.
There we go. So yeah, if we just search form under in beta, so you can see I'm in the form styling and layout customization beta. I'm in the CRM and live validation on form beta. And then there's perform company research on CRM, which is a beta that I have not yet joined. So again, product updates, beta, form. And if you're not in the new form editor, it will get you access because it is currently an open beta. So what does that practically mean? So you can see here under my list of forms, it says form legacy editor, which considering I just joined this beta like 6 days ago, because it's very new, and it's, and and it's not fully live yet. It felt a little bit, you know, presumptuous of them to start automatically calling the older form editor the legacy editor. Feels a little grandiose, but once you make the check, that's basically what it means. A form that's built in the old one will be legacy. A form that's built in the new one will just be in the forms editor. So this one, the legacy form editor, is going to be the one that you've known and loved for many years, or known and hated for many years, depending on how you feel about it. But once you have access to the beta, just new form editor. And the biggest change here is that you are now able to build multi-page forms. So if you've been using Flowform, Jotform, heck, Gravity Forms with their multi-page form editor setup because you have a lot of fields but didn't want to just have it as one super long form, you can now do that in HubSpot. I will be perfectly honest, that might be because I don't have the world's largest screen. I still think the layout of all of this is key, like the idea that it's kind of like scroll here, scroll bar within the tab, scroll bar over here, multiple pages. I think that they're going to refine this builder as time goes on, make it a little bit less real estate intensive, but it really does add, it really does open up some interesting possibilities, the biggest of which being the multi-page form editor. Now, naturally, one thing is people, we can't save progress on forms yet. I know one reason a lot of folks like to have multi-page forms, but we're not there quite yet. Mechanically speaking, it is very, similar enough to the existing editor. So, if you've got your fields, you can create new properties, and you can have form fields that aren't connected to HubSpot properties. So I've just, if I want to build out this label, flavor of ice cream. Where am I? There we go. Option 1. Drop in an additional option. So I can build out the form because up until this point, questions that weren't attached to HubSpot properties were limited to surveys, were limited to meeting scheduling forms. So if you are doing a convention sign-up form or something like that, or just sending out a customer survey, to send out some swag, hey, what t-shirt size do you have? There's now the potential to say, just ask a question that isn't also going to create a property in your database, which, as HubSpot providers, we see a lot of times one of the biggest sources of contact of property bloat is having to create, as people building forms with properties that they're only going to use one time for events or single-use forms or stuff like that. So an interesting opportunity there. Again, sorry, and this is, again, me. So we are our logic rules, same thing. You can get into the layout here. It looks a lot like the content editor. If you're familiar with the landing page builder, this is again another effort of HubSpot to try and kind of standardize the user interface across HubSpot. Because I'm on HubSpot free right now, we can't add an additional step. But if we wanted to, and I had access to the feature, add another step, that's just going to drop another page in here between there. You can also add it by clicking there. And then when you want to cover your confirmation messages, you do it right there. Again, another place that I think is a little bit awkward, it took me a long time to find this the first time I started poking around with it, is if you want to adjust your on submit behavior, you actually just do it on this by clicking on the last tab. I spent a bunch of time wondering, hey, where the heck do I find it in here? But So yeah, and then in the settings was the automatically create, which is kind of the turn off cookies. There's your notification settings, your standard language and region. So all of the items that you could do in the old form builder are here, but obviously new layout means new location for some of those options, and adding in the ability to have those fields which aren't directly connected to HubSpot properties, and the ability to have multi-steps. And I don't know exactly where multi-steps click in this beta, whether it's a starter feature or a pro feature, but the only reason I don't have it is because I am currently on free because we're a small provider. So
I looked it up. It is a starter feature.
perfect. So yeah, if you're on HubSpot Starter, you'll be able to have those page forms. So I'm going to stop the builder right there, stop the presentation right there. I'm going to hop back to Bevy. Doesn't
All
look
right.
like
Well,
any questions on that one yet. So, like I say, good luck trying out the new form editor. You know, even if you're not going to opt, even if you didn't like the look of that, it's probably going to be coming. My gut would be sometime late this year or early 2025. So it is on the horizon. Feel free to opt in to get your hands on it before they force it down our throats. And just take a look at the rest of the product updates and betas that you can opt into. You might find something in there that meets a need that you've been shooting for.
all right. That's great, Cody. Thanks for showing us the new form editor. I know I am always never psyched about change, but it's coming. We'll get used to it. So now that we've seen kind of how to build forms in the HubSpot interface, what properties should I be putting on my forms? Like company properties, contact properties, ticket properties? Is that even a thing I can do?
Totally. So I'll talk about this one. Yeah, actually, I'll get mine. Yeah, I'll talk a little high level a little bit, and then I'll jump into some examples. That is the question of what should I put on my forms is something that we get asked a lot. And the answer isn't the same from organization to organization. But I do have some general guidance which I provide, which is in my experience, forms typically fall into one of three buckets. High, low value forms, mid value forms, and high value forms. Low value forms meaning somebody that is interested in your brand, but hasn't really raised their hand for a dedicated marketing or sales touch. This is things like blog comment forms, newsletter sign up forms, generally anything where you're only going to be asking for like an email address or maybe a first name and an email address. Mid-value forms represent somebody that's probably ready for a nurture process in that they've been willing to give you a little bit more information, but haven't specifically asked to be contacted by sales. These are things like ebooks, webinar signups, on basically anything where you're kind of like sharing knowledge or content. And then high value forms are those things that should kind of be instantly flagged for sales, which is contact us forms, request a demo forms, meeting schedulers, if you're using that as a conversion point. Now, the direction I provide is that a form should always ask for enough information to facilitate the next step in your sales and marketing process. So for a newsletter form, the reason that is generally just email is because the only thing that they've asked for is to be added to your newsletter. So all you really need for that is the email address. Now, if you do have industry segmented newsletters, you might need industry and industry or topic and email address, so you can accurately bucket that person into the correct email stream or something like that. For your mid-value forms, those nurture forms, those you generally need some way. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Lisa. You generally need some way to both deliver them the content, and because your next step for them is some sort of nurturing, you generally need some way to identify what the best type of content, what the best stream of content, who the best person to do that nurturing is. So that's when I start asking for a little bit more. And this is where we start getting into, how much is too much to ask. So my general recommendation is, obviously there is, the testing has shown that there is a correlation between having more fields and having lower, submission rates. But that correlates most strongly when you're asking for personally identifying information. So phone numbers, addresses, obviously, like personal email address, things like that. Because ultimately what people don't want is to be prematurely, approached with a sales outreach, whether that's a sequence, whether that's a phone call, whatever. So asking for less personally identifying stuff, like, what's the head count of your company? In which state or country are you based? Maybe something a little bit more specific, like we used to work with an outsourced accounting company that asked, how many W-2 employees do you have? And they would use that set of information to determine what the best follow-up was. So you're going to download an ebook. We're going to ask you, what country are you based in, and how many W-2 employees do you have? Because the goal was, we're going to deliver you your ebook by using your email and your first name and your last name, but we're then going to determine which nurture stream to put you in based on whether you're in the US or not, because they didn't do business with folks outside the US, and how many W-2 employees that you had, because they found that that was one of the biggest differentiators of accounting needs. So they asked for what they needed to facilitate the next step in their marketing and sales process. Then what you want to do is keep that data set consistent, but more robust when you go up to high value forms, so demo request forms. So again, to take the example of the outsourced accounting firm, mid-value forms, they asked country and number of W-2 employees. At the high-value forms, they then started asking annual revenue and what your funding status was, because they were really focused on doing outsourced accounting for startups. So again, they went from basically first name and email to first name, last name, email, country, number of W-2 employees, and then on that last high-value form, that same set, plus annual revenue and funding status. Because the next step of the demo request, the meeting schedule, the contact us, was to put them in the hands of the sales team. And the sales team said, that's what we need to know to have a confident conversation with that person. So your form should always facilitate whatever the next concrete step in your sales form and marketing process is. And you shouldn't be afraid to ask for the information that you need to make sure that that next step happens effectively. Because again, my last point is that if somebody isn't willing to provide that kind of non-specific or that non-personal information to facilitate that process, the odds of them being ready to take the next step or being a worthwhile prospect for you are also pretty low. So again, don't be afraid to ask for what you need to facilitate that next step.
All right. So that makes sense to me on like specific forums, like ebooks, webinars, things like that, or demo requests. But what about kind of really like mushy forums, I'm going to call it, like the contact us form? It kind of does everything at all levels. Like, do you just recommend not using those and using more of these specific forms, or do you have any particular strategies on how to, I don't know, manage that mush in the general forms?
Absolutely. Oh, yes. And actually, I'll pick that one up in just a second. I do want to say one more thing about the low, mid, and high value. Often, I will also have a hidden field on my forms, which indicates whether a form is high, medium, or low value. And the reason I do that is because I like to use that as an indication in lead scoring. Because often when people are looking to score their forms, they'll say, okay, I need the newsletter form to give people 10 points. I need these 5 ebook forms to give people 20 points. And I need these 3 contact forms to give people 50 points. And frankly, managing the list of forms and remembering, oh no, we've added a new contact form. Guess I better go add it to the lead scoring, often gets neglected. So a lot of times what I'll say is, let's just have a hidden checkbox that says high value equals yes. And then anytime we're building a form that should be considered high value from a lead scoring perspective, we then just put that hidden field on, and then the lead scoring model says give people 50 points if they have had a high value form submission. It just, in my opinion, or in my experience, makes it a lot more scalable to tie scoring to forms without having to maintain a huge list of individual forms. Okay, sorry. So now going back to Lisa's actual question about multi-purpose forms. Now, this is almost always the contact form. I am 100% a believer in, on your contact form, asking the purpose of the inquiry. So because often a contact form is first name, last name, email, company name. Is this the next? Do you have the next slide, Lisa? There we go. Often, first name, last name, company, email. But I always say throw in the old, what's the purpose of this inquiry? Because it's often going to be, your the purpose options are often, I want to get a job. I have an issue I want to talk to you about. I want to work with you, or I'm a potential customer. And then obviously I want to sell you the services that I offer, SEO, janitorial, whatever that happens to be. And so one of the things people struggle with the contact form is, who do I route it to? How do I score it? Like, who should monitor it? What should we do with it once it's an inbox? Blah, 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 blah. So just, if there are multiple reasons people could submit a single form, just ask them to self-identify what the purpose of the submission is. It's going to make your life infinitely easier. And yes, the people who want to sell you janitorial services are probably mostly not going to identify themselves as, I provide a service that could benefit Hubcap Solutions. But some of them will. And again, it makes it easier to filter those ones out.
So I don't know, speaking of kind of those people who want to sell you services, how do you manage like junk and spam submissions? How do you minimize that with forms?
Totally. So I'm going to exit. I'm going to grab the screen share back. Just as mostly. Yeah. There really are two fundamental ways. Now, I will say that there are ways above and beyond this. If you have access to a half decent web developer, they can do scripts that detect bots, and there are extra like web dev based ways to handle this. But there are a couple of interesting options we have at our disposal. The first, I want to do it this way. The first and most basic is absolutely just have CAPTCHA on. Like also use native embedded HubSpot forms, because one thing that I find is, if you are using a WordPress plugin, not so much Gravity Forms, but like when I started up my website, I used a plugin called Forminator, which had an integration to HubSpot. So I had a Forminator form on the website rather than a HubSpot form, just because frankly I was too lazy to style the embed code on my website. So I went with the integration, and I was constantly getting spam submissions, just 2, 3 a day. Now, we're not a super high traffic website, but that all immediately stopped when, instead of having a Forminator plugin form, I just removed that and directly embedded the HubSpot form. So first lesson is, HubSpot forms are better, generally speaking, at detecting and routing spam and steering away spam submissions than other plugins are. So if you're having an issue and you don't have an embedded HubSpot form, try an embedded HubSpot form. Make sure that embedded HubSpot form has CAPTCHA, which you're going to find here under the other form options. Just tick it and you'll get the old CAPTCHA box. If you are a B2B organization who only wants form submissions from other B2B or other non-personal email addresses, there is also the ability to say, by clicking on the email property in your form, there's a whole section down here that says email domains to block. If you want to block all the free email lists, so my old fan is like, if you don't want to get submissions from elvisfan.com. Awesome. Just flip on the block free email providers checkbox, and you won't get from any of HubSpot's very robust list of free email providers. If you have competitors that you don't want submitting your forms, if you just constantly keep getting, from Joe at SEOcleaners.com, or, you can absolutely just throw it in there. And now it's going to reject submissions from SEOcleaners.com. So again, a little bit manual to block individual email domains, but you absolutely can do it. And, a lot of spam comes from things that are on the free email providers list anyway, so you can block that. Now, that does also block like Hotmail, Yahoo, Gmail, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, if you're strictly looking to steer away suspicious email domains, that, you don't do that, because you'll probably be overcorrecting and eliminating the Gmails. But another handy
before you go too far, can you go back to that box and just add multiple email domains? Like, does it put the little box around it, or do you separate it with commas or colons? Or I always have that problem too when I do
this is one place again. It's not going to give you a little box. You just have to go comma.
Okay.
Also, another native feature of HubSpot is.
Sorry. We're asking more about this. If you have blocked somebody, like if you put them in that domain, do they know you blocked them, that you don't want to talk to them? Or does it just say, thanks for submitting the form, and then it just goes nowhere?
Yeah, it will prevent visitors from submitting a form with an email from any of the specified domains. And it's actually going to look something like this. So HubSpot will reject
something like what?
Oh, sorry. I should this tab instead. There we go.
Thanks.
My bad. If you've ever tried to submit a test submission to a HubSpot form, you have learned that it just won't accept test.com. I think it also won't accept fake.com. Oh no, fake.com is fine. But HubSpot does have a list of domains that, even if you don't have the block domains on, that it will reject, just because it knows that those aren't real domains. Also, if it is from an email domain that is not validated, it will also reject. I don't have an example ready to hand, but I ran into this scenario like 2-3 months ago, where a client was submitting form submissions on behalf of some people who had expressed interest on a phone conversation, and they kept typing in the person's email domain, and it was just the form would reject it, and they were like, Cody, there's something wrong with our form. So we hopped on, and then we found out that the email address, the email domain, just had a typo in it, so it didn't exist. It was just a non-valid email domain. And that was why it was rejecting the form submission. As soon as we actually got it into a real domain that actually existed, it accepted the form submission just fine. But so even if you aren't using CAPTCHA, even if you aren't excluding certain email domains, HubSpot is doing some kind of passive validation to avoid stuff for invalid emails or obviously fake emails from being allowed to submit. I'm going to hop back to sharing.
So what about blocking your own company's addresses to limit kind of employee submissions? So like if we wanted to block at Hubcap Solutions, how would you test if you can do that? Like, is it possible? What's your thought on that?
I mean, it's definitely possible. I would not do it, just because you probably will have to, you will have to put, and again, you can do it on a form by form basis. So maybe you do exclude it from the contact us form, but generally speaking, I find that it's just going to make your own life more complicated. Like, you're probably going to want to do form submissions with your business email address, to test whether your forms work or what the success messages look like or things like that. And just having your own domain blocked is going to make that more complicated for you.
I was going to ask, isn't there also a setting for that somewhere in like the domains? Because I remember that big education company we worked with had that. So people submitting forms, the form submissions wouldn't go through because they were on the same domain as the form. Sorry, it's been so long. I don't remember where the setting
Yeah,
was.
I don't really remember the details on that one.
All right. Kayla, let me know if that fully answered your questions or not, if I was a little bit off there in interpreting it. But otherwise, Cody, I'll let you steam ahead with, all right, good to go.
Okay. The last bit is just spam submissions. Like if you do get something, and this is generally if you have a form that's on a domain which isn't linked to your if you have a HubSpot form embedded on a domain that isn't linked to your HubSpot account. So let's say I took my website form, I did the embed code, and I spun up hubcapsolutions.eu or HubSpot solutions.tv. So now I have HubSpotSolutions.ca or HubCapSolutions.ca and HubCapSolutions.tv, and I put this embed code on that new site, which I haven't linked to HubSpot yet. It's going to say, hey, there's you're getting submissions from a domain that you haven't connected to HubSpot. Are these spam? Now, is this one of those situations where I know why they started doing this? I really don't. My instinct is that some companies ran into an issue where scammers were finding a way to copy their forms out of their website code and then put those forms someplace on some other website. So they were kind of like spoofing. So I don't know the etymology of it, but yeah. What I will say is if you do see they have this spam submissions column now, if you pop in and you see that there are any spam submissions, you'll be able to click on this and review those spam submissions, at which point you can then choose to release those spam submissions or you can choose to delete those spam submissions. So if you do have anything showing up in here, just check on it and see what's what. Also, speaking of deleting submissions, if you go into your forms, so this was something that I just, I had sent through a test submission at some point, and then I just deleted my contact record. I can go ahead and delete the form submission. It's not going to delete the contact if there was still a contact associated with it. But if I now go back to all website forms, once this refreshes, it's going to say 3 form submissions rather than 4, and it's going to recalculate the submissions per page view calculation. So again, a lot of times I've known people who have had a whole team sending through tests on a new form, and then they're like, oh God, it sucks that half of my form submissions aren't form submissions that I actually care about. So you can pop in and delete those. You can also do that for again, if you don't care about those SEO or office cleaning services that are pinging you, feel free to pop in and delete those form submissions as well.
All right. So my next question is kind of my favorite form question because I have submitted many a form on many a websites and gotten no response, even though the little after form message says, we'll get back to you in 24 hours. I didn't get my fence quote. Your cousin's bakery never responded to my request for wedding cupcakes, so we stopped going there. How do I make sure my users get the form notifications and do the form things?
Totally. Let me make sure I've got this one. Okay. I'm just going to get my presentation to the right. There we go. So there's 2 answers to that question. There's the simple answer, and then there's the more complicated answer. I'm going to get my screen share going here. The simple answer is just there are forms. If we pop in form and we go options, and we go down to here, in any form, there's the native form notification options. So the follow-up, send submission email notification to the contact's owner. If you click this, and that person already exists and is owned by a user in the system, it's going to send a notification to that person's owner. So this is most commonly used when previous leads or existing customers are reconverting on forms. So it's already been assigned to an account, a CSR or a business development rep or heck, even just a marketing team. And they re-engage, and independent of any other logic that might happen, any scoring, any whatever, we just want the person who's tasked with managing that relationship to get get notified, send submission email notifications to that contact's owner. Now, I understand for a lot of organizations, you might not 100% trust your contact ownership, or you might not have ever made that a priority. So this may or may not work for your situation. But if you do have your contact ownership set up pretty reliably, or if it's pretty reliably set by a system like Salesforce, which is assigning ownership and then syncing that ownership down to HubSpot, this could be a valid option for you. The other is just send submission notifications to. So in this one, anybody that's a user in HubSpot and only a user in HubSpot, there's no saying, email Pearson@gmail.com. I can't just add my mom to that list and say, hey, she's not in HubSpot, but she gets notified about all the form submissions to my website because I want her to know that I run a successful business and I'm a big boy. But so you do have to add any person who wants to get notified as a user. The other thing you can do is you can add teams. So let's say you have a support form and you want to notify everybody on the support team when it gets submitted, or you have you want everybody on the marketing team to get submitted every time somebody downloads an ebook or signs up for a webinar or something like that. You could just add, if you had a team, you'll have below users, you'll have teams, and then you could pick marketing, CSR, West Coast sales, blah, 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 whatever. And the practical reason to do that is, now let's say you have a couple of different ebook forms, you have 5 or 6. And again, you want that whole marketing team to get notified every time any one of those forms gets submitted. Just set up all those notifications to go to marketing team. And then when somebody leaves the company or joins the company, now you just have to change the members of that marketing team rather than having to remember, oh, nuts, I should go change, and remove Jane from the submission notifications and add Joe to all the submission notifications. So again, this is one really kind of like quick win, low hanging fruit, whatever we want to call it, place to use teams. Now, thing to keep in mind is that this behavior happens every time the form is submitted. So there's obviously many situations where you're like, I don't want somebody to get notified every time the form gets submitted. I just want people to be notified when it's in a state that they manage, or when it's when they've expressed interest in a product that they're the assigned sales rep for, or when I'm sending those form submissions for my contact form and they're saying, hey, I'm interested in a job with Hubcap Solutions. Okay, I just want to notify the HR team when that type of submission comes in. The short answer to that is that's where you need workflows. So you will have to be on a pro or higher tier account. So you can pop in and say, build an event-based workflow that's going to say, hey, whenever the form was submitted and value equals X or value equals Y or value equals Z, branch and send that notification to somebody else. So more complicated scenarios do require workflows, which we're not going to get into today. Also, if you get complaints from people who are like, I'm not getting my notifications. First off, potential that it's going to spam. There's definitely that. Alternatively, ask them to check their profiles and preferences, notifications, and see if they've turned off email notifications. That's the most common. Somebody was getting too many email notifications, so they popped in they turned off email notifications, and now they're like, why aren't I getting notified of when those forms get submitted, even though I'm set up as the person to be notified? It's like, well, if you turned off your notifications, or if you really want to get granular, you can pop in and look at those things. Be like, hey, maybe you just turned off get notified about form submissions. So yeah, obviously check spam, but if they're not getting them, check their notification preferences as well, because that might be the source of the issue.
All right, so that's great for making sure that they kind of know, so I can yell at them if they don't do it. But how do I know if they don't get back to me, if they don't handle the form submission? Do you have any strategies for that?
Absolutely. And I'm not going to say the easiest one, but the one that I like the most is inboxes. So most people think of inboxes when they're thinking about chat flows or chatbots, because if you go into automations, chat flows, if you want to create a chat flow website, yeah, it's fine. It's going to ask you, hey, which inbox do you want this chat flow to go to? Sorry, I was looking at the wrong. I didn't share the tab. Doesn't matter. You're gonna link your chat flow to your inbox, and then you're gonna see all those live chats, and this is where you're gonna pop up to manage your live chats. But you can also link forms. So here I've got my website contact form linked to this inbox. So that Mr. Example submission that we saw when we were looking at my website submission, it's now right here. I can see where it came in. I'm not assigning these to anybody by default, but ideally, whoever's going to respond to this is going to claim that chat, and then you can just respond to it, via this channel right here. Or if you want to respond to it externally from HubSpot or via some other channel, you can absolutely just pop in on the comment, or worst case, lowest bar of kind of acceptability in my mind is you can just go close conversation. And then it's going to pop down into the all closed. And if you have multiple forms connected to the same inbox, you're going to be able to see, okay, which form did all of those come in for. So this really allows you to centralize form response management in a, what I think is a pretty scalable way that, gives clear timestamps of when it was open, when it was closed, who was responsible for it, X, Y, Z, in a way that I think just having people respond to those form submissions based on just replying from their own personal email or whatever, I think it just creates a lot more visibility. Also, I won't go into it in detail, but you can link forms and emails to the same inbox. So let's say that you have it out there that you can, email support@hubcapsolutions.ca or submit our contact form. You could have it so that both of those streams of inquiry land in the inbox, and then you could manage them both in parallel rather than having the forms end up, on webs in HubSpot under that form submission list, and then the emails just arriving in somebody's inbox, and then you can never see what's happening with them. In HubSpot, just link both streams to your inbox. The other option is a little bit more filter based, but if we look at advanced filters, you can look at it and say, hey, recent conversion date, is, this week, and latest activity, last activity date, and the latest activity date. Yeah, there we go. Is so I'll just go unknown for simplicity's sake. So if it was a new conversion, you could basically say, hey, if their recent conversion date is this week, or their first conversion date is this week, and the last activity date, which represents the last time somebody had a meeting, logged a phone call, sent a one-to-one email, logged a note, completed a task, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is unknown, then you know you've got somebody that converted within that time span, and and then doesn't have a last activity date that is reasonable given when their conversion was. So that might be somebody that you want to follow up on to say, hey, I see this guy converted 3 days ago, but he hasn't had a last activity date in the last 3 days. What are we doing? Did we just forget the login activity, or has nobody actually followed up on this one?
All right. Well, hopefully that means people will answer my form submissions. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one submitting forms on the website with how rarely I get answers. So one thing I wanted to ask about, we talked earlier about kind of a specific form type, the mushy contact us forms. But what about some of the other specific form types, like trade show forms? Are those different? Are there any other kind of different considerations or anything that you want to point out while building trade show forms?
There absolutely is. Thank you for the setup on that one. Go back to share this tab. I'll go back to forms. And really, it comes down to one key option. Always create contact for new email address. This is your trade show booth or your internal team form. You have to have this box ticked on. What happens is HubSpot, we all know, or we all likely know, that HubSpot matches people based on the email address they provide in the form. So if Cody at hubcapsolutions.ca goes and submits a form on your website, and there's already a contact with Cody at hubcapsolutions.ca in your database, it's going to match that form submission to the existing contact. That's kind of fundamental to how HubSpot operates. What people sometimes don't realize is that HubSpot also tries to match based on IP address. So, and it actually tries to match an IP address before it tries to match on email address. So let's say right now, I don't have this setting on. This setting is currently off. It is not always creating a new contact for a new email address. If I were to submit that form, I'll share. Actually, no, I'm going to stop sharing that one. Sorry. If I were to submit that form as myself, and then say to submit it as Lisa, even though our email addresses are different, because I was submitting that form twice from the same device, thus from the same email address, it's not going to create a new contact for Lisa. It's just going to say, oh, this person submitted from the device, so I'm going to create a contact that's named Cody Pearson, Cody at hubcapsolutions.ca. Then the next time that's submitted from the same device, it's just going to overwrite the data on that original contact. So if you're doing this at a trade show, because that's likely going to be at on one device at a kiosk, attendee number one's going to come up. They're going to submit their information. They're going to say submit. They're going to refresh the page. Attendee number two is going to come up. They're going to submit. And then what you're going to end up with at the end of that trade show isn't 50 different contacts for the people who submitted that form. You're going to end up with one contact whose information had been overwritten 50 different times because all of those submissions were coming from the same device. So you pop in, you always create contact for new email address, and then that's not going to happen. Every time it sees a new email address, it's going to say, oh, this is a new person, and it's going to go ahead and create a different contact for them each time. The thing that's not going to do is that's not going to allow you to pre-populate contact fields with known values. And this is just the and device matching. So it is basically one or the other. You either pre-populate or you always create for a new email address. But if it's an internal support form or a trade show form, you're going to want to always create, a new contact for a new email address.
Sorry, Deanne, does that answer your question? Cody beat me to it before I could ask it for you. And while Deanne is thinking about that, I'll get Cody, you to move on to the next set of forms, or my next question, which is GDPR and data privacy. I know still very little about it. I'm like, no, that's a Cody thing. So can you enlighten us to make that an everybody thing, or at least a me thing as well, not just a Cody thing?
Totally. Okay, the data privacy module. And if Deanne does drop in, just shout and I will halt my train and revisit. This is the data privacy module. You find it under other form elements, data privacy options. None, there are none. Consent checkboxes for subscription. So the other option is consent for just subscriptions, or also you can do consent for that and data processing, or you can just do legitimate interest. Now, this started out as the GDPR settings. They called it GDPR settings for a long time, and the idea is that these two options here basically put you in various levels of compliance with the EU's data protection law, which is called GDPR, which, unlike in the States, require you to have people explicitly opt into your communications. So a lot of companies have a field on their form. Do you want to? Lisa, would you mind muting?
Oh,
Thank you. Have a lot of have a checkbox somewhere on the forms that says, "Do you want to subscribe to my newsletter?" Which is a good thing to do. You're asking people's permission to send them email marketing, and often that powers an active list that you then send out your marketing email to. The downside to that is that doesn't actually connect to the subscriptions options people have when they receive an email. If somebody says, if somebody goes in and goes manage their preferences and says, opt me out of marketing information from company ABC, that doesn't, unless you've set up a fairly complicated set of workflows, that doesn't then go and uncheck that I would like to subscribe to your email information, if you're just using a regular checkbox field. If you're using the data privacy module, it does. Because if I click on this, I'm using I'm using the option that says a consent for checkbox for communications, a form submit as consent to process data. So when I do that, it actually specifically says, hey, what subscription type is that person explicitly opting into? Oh, okay, so they're explicitly opting into marketing email monthly newsletter. So if that person ever goes in, manages their subscription preferences, and opts out of the monthly newsletter subscription type, it is actually going to adjust their opt-out setting to opt it out just of that subscription type. So the data privacy module provides a couple of advantages. One, your GDPR compliant. Two, without having to do a whole lot of extra work, it actually does take advantage of the genuine marketing email subscription setup that you have in HubSpot. Now, again, most people just unsubscribe. They don't worry about managing their subscription preferences. And so even if you did have that just a single checkbox, the unsubscribe is going to overwrite all of that. So for a lot of organizations, this might not be a huge area of concern. But if compliance matters to you, and if you do maintain multiple different email streams, this is a good way to kind of put yourself on the right side of both user experience and legal compliance. The downside is obviously that it's huge and kind of ugly. You can absolutely modify that. Like, you don't have to have content in every single one of these. So you can customize this to legal language that suits your own, brand voice or, appetite for compliance. You know, you can get as deep or as shallow as you want. So all that is to say is that you can use this data privacy module to plug much more closely into the actual HubSpot subscription management module without it becoming a huge hulking weird looking beast at the bottom of your forms. So I strongly advise anybody who is genuinely managing email subscriptions to leverage the data privacy module. And last but not least, it's funny, it's kind of counterintuitive. If you go under privacy and consent in your settings, you don't actually have to have the data privacy settings turned on to use the data privacy module. All this does is basically say, hey, now instead of being able to send to anybody, as long as you give them the option to opt out, this basically says, okay, now you're only allowed to send to people who have explicitly opted in. So if you are really looking to comply with GDPR or other data privacy legislation, turning this on and using the module on your forms, again, that puts you on the right side of all those compliance issues.
All right. Cody, do you want to grab the presentation while you're sharing the screen? Just that last slide. Because we are pretty much at time right now. So if you have any form questions that we didn't get to, don't hesitate to send us an email, ask those questions. We'd love to get back to you and answer them. Our contact information is on the last slide deck, and you will receive the slide deck and the recording of the event shortly after the event. I'd say at least within the next couple days. Depends when Cody sends it out. Cody, do you want to share the last slide?
Nope. Sorry, that was me clearly just showing the wrong tab.
Yep, doing it wrong. All right.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, and then last but not least is Lexing. We're going to be taking the lead on lead scoring as our next HubSpot user group, which will likely be, I'm thinking, November, early December-ish, before the end of the year.
Okay, perfect. So thank you all for making time to attend, or if you're watching this recorded after the fact, thank you so much for taking time to watch the recording. We hope it's been really helpful for you. And like I say, if you have any lingering questions or anything that comes up in the next couple days about forms that we didn't get to, fire us an email and let us know.
Take care, gang. We'll talk soon, I'm sure.